Captain Britanov knew his submarine was dead the moment he saw water where water cannot exist. 680 miles from any shore, something is dripping inside Missile Tube 6. But these seals don't leak. They're designed to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep Atlantic and contain the most volatile fuel ever loaded onto a warship. Unless someone designed them to fail. Now, brown vapor is boiling up through the deck plates. The crew knows what it means when the air turns that color. Their lungs have 4 minutes before the atmosphere itself becomes acid. But they can't flood the compartment to stop what's coming. 16 nuclear warheads don't sink quietly, and the potential for radioactive contamination threatens the waters near Bermuda. 20-year-old Sergei Preminin is already at the hatch to the reactor compartment. The manual release valve is inside. The room is burning. The automatic systems won't engage, and no one has explained why a Soviet failsafe would refuse to save Soviet sailors. He's turning the wheel, and in 72 hours, the Kremlin will classify the failure as an accident before the rescue ships even arrive. Though some investigators and former officers would later suggest the crew was aware of persistent maintenance issues with the missile seals before K-219 ever left port. 3 October 1986, 680 miles northeast of Bermuda. Captain Second Rank Igor Britanov stands in a submarine that doesn't feel like his own. K-219, a Yankee-class ballistic missile submarine, runs submerged at patrol depth, 15 years old and showing every one of them. Behind him, 11 officers and 16 warrant officers who weren't his crew 3 weeks ago. A rushed pre-deployment, Cold War tempo demands. Now they're manning an unfamiliar boat together, deep in the Atlantic. In the missile compartment, 16 R-27U missiles, 34 nuclear warheads total. Each missile body stores its own UDMH fuel and nitrogen tetroxide oxidizer in separate tanks. Pre-fueled, fast launch capability, the advantage that made them dangerous. But there's a cost. Vulnerable to seal failure, vulnerable to seawater intrusion. One tube is already welded shut. An earlier hypergolic reaction saw to that. The twin VM4 reactors hum beneath them, driving the boat forward. Britanov knows what he's commanding. The question is whether this composite crew can hold it together. Seaman Sergei Preminin, 20 years old, from Vologda Oblast, stands watch in the engineering spaces. He is a reactor technician, trained to monitor neutron flux, coolant flow, and control rod position. The R-27U missiles behind the pressure hull are a constant presence. Each one holds over 2 tons of propellant, hypergolic fuel that ignites on contact with its oxidizer. No spark needed. The chemistry does the work. Preminin knows the drill. If a seal fails, seawater mixing with nitrogen tetroxide forms nitric acid, which eats through tank walls and allows fuel and oxidizer to meet. The result is a fire no foam can extinguish. Like the rest of the crew, he was aware of the previous tube failure that had claimed a sailor's life. At 0514 Moscow time, the BCH-2 officer reports water dripping from the plug of missile tube number 6. Third tube from the bow, port side. Britanov orders an inspection. The tube is supposed to be dry. The plug seals out the ocean and the missile itself sits in a protective sleeve. But water is there, collecting in the bottom of the silo. The captain knows what this means. The seal has failed. Seawater is in contact with the missile body. If it reaches the oxidizer tank, the clock starts. Nitrogen tetroxide and seawater make nitric acid. Nitric acid dissolves metal. Once the tanks rupture, UDMH and oxidizer mix, and the fire begins. Captain Britanov orders K-219 to ascend to 46 meters to reduce external pressure, hoping to slow the leak. He starts a pump to dry out tube 6, standard procedure. At 0532, brown clouds of nitrogen dioxide gas issue from under the missile tube plug. The reaction has already started. Seawater has reached the oxidizer tank, and nitric acid is eating through the thin aluminum walls, separating fuel from oxidizer inside the missile. The pump cannot keep up. The chemistry is faster than the machinery. Weapons Officer Petrikov prepares to vent the tube by disengaging the hatch cover, releasing the gas to the sea. But the acid has breached both tanks. Fuel and oxidizer are mixing in a confined space. No foam aboard can extinguish hypergolic combustion. UDMH and nitrogen tetroxide ignite on contact, releasing temperatures above 900 degrees Celsius. The reaction is self-sustaining. Heat decomposes more nitric acid into nitrogen dioxide, which reacts with more seawater, which makes more acid. The cycle feeds itself. Standard firefighting tools are useless. The crew cannot flood the compartment because the warheads are still aboard. Water on a damaged warhead casing risks contamination, and flooding a missile tube with live ordnance violates every protocol. Petrikov and his team watch the brown vapor thicken. The pressure inside Tube 6 is climbing. The silo was designed to contain a controlled launch, not an uncontrolled burn. USS Augusta is nearby. U.S. Navy P-3 Orion patrols will detect the event within minutes. Cold War standing orders are explicit. Deny distress. Refuse American assistance. Protect classified reactor and missile design. Britanov knows the cost. The nearest Soviet naval base was thousands of miles away. Even with merchant vessels in the region, help was still many hours from reaching the boat. His crew has minutes, not hours. But if he calls for help, he exposes the VM-4 reactor layout, the R-27U guidance electronics, and the missile tube pressure ratings to NATO intelligence. The choice is between his men and his orders. He follows the orders. He does not transmit a distress signal. He does not answer American radio calls. The boat is alone. 0538, Moscow time. The explosion in Missile Tube 6 blows off the silo hatch, ejects the R-27U missile and its two warheads into the Atlantic, and tears a breach in the pressure hull. 3 sailors in Compartment 4 die instantly, flash burns and overpressure. K-219 plunges from 40 meters to over 300 meters as seawater floods forward through the breach. Britanov orders all compartments sealed. Emergency pumps engage, and the crew stabilizes depth. But 25 sailors are now trapped in the sealed bow section. The captain hesitates, then permits the chief engineer to open the hatch and evacuate them. The bow is taking water faster than the pumps can clear it. Instruments show reactor number 1 has not scrammed automatically. The control rods should have dropped on loss of power or hull breach, but they remain withdrawn. Corrosive nitrogen dioxide gas from the missile bay has damaged the electromagnetic triggers. Remote shutdown from the control station does not work. The reactor is still critical. Neutron flux continues. Coolant flow is dropping because the forward pumps are offline. Temperature climbs. If the reactor stays critical during flooding, steam pressure will spike, the primary loop can crack, and radioactive coolant vents through the hull breach into the Atlantic. Britanov needs a manual shutdown. That means someone has to go into the reactor compartment and physically insert the control rods by hand. Lieutenant Nikolai Belikov and Seaman Preminin volunteer to enter the reactor compartment and manually insert the control rods. They put on full-face gas masks. The compartment is at 70 degrees Celsius, hot enough to cause heat exhaustion in minutes. They carry hand cranks and move quickly. 3 of the 4 rods drop into place. Belikov loses consciousness from heat and gas exposure. According to available accounts, Preminin helps him reach the hatch and gets him to the crew outside, then makes the decision to turn back. The 4th rod is still out. The reactor is still generating heat. If he leaves now, thermal runaway begins within minutes. He goes back alone. If the reactor stays critical during a sinking, the core keeps splitting atoms at depth. That means heat. Uncontrollable heat. Coolant loss leads to steam generation and pressure spikes inside the primary loop. Thermal runaway can crack the loop and vent radioactive steam through the hull breach into the Atlantic shipping lanes. Preminin is alone in near darkness, temperature near 70 degrees Celsius, breathing through a gas mask. He reaches the fourth control rod. The rods are boron carbide absorber assemblies. They hang above the reactor core, and when they drop, they capture neutrons and kill the chain reaction. But the fire and gas exposure have heat deformed the holders. The rods will not drop on their own. He grips the hand crank. Each one must be manually forced into place using body weight. He leans in, cranks. The rod resists. He cranks again. Slowly, it descends into the core. The reactor compartment hatch was designed with external locking dogs only. Soviet submarine procedure required a crewman outside to secure the hatch after someone entered. Once Preminin completes the shutdown and attempts to exit, a pressure differential jams the hatch. Higher pressure inside the flooded, steam-filled compartment pushes the hatch against the frame. He cannot pull it open alone from inside. Crew outside cannot apply enough force to overcome the differential before toxic gas forces them aft. The hatch opens inward. Physics works against him. There are no hydraulic tools in that section of the boat. The hatch will not move. Preminin confirms the fourth rod is seated. Reactor indicators show neutron flux dropping, temperature stabilizing. The chain reaction has stopped. He has prevented thermal runaway. The reactor will not crack its coolant loop. The Atlantic shipping lanes will not be contaminated by radioactive steam. The boat is saved from meltdown. But now he must get out. He moves to the hatch and tries to open it. It will not budge. He signals by banging on the bulkhead with a wrench. Crew outside hear the sound. They know he is alive. They try to pull the hatch open from their side. Crew outside attempt to pull the hatch open, but that same pressure differential Preminin cannot overcome from inside creates a seal they cannot break. Steam and residual gas pressure inside the reactor compartment is higher than atmospheric pressure in the control station. The hatch frame is jammed tight. According to available accounts, they need hydraulic tools, but those are reportedly forward in the flooded bow section or aft in engineering. Nitrogen dioxide from the missile bay continues to spread through ventilation ducts into aft compartments. Brown vapor thickens. The crew is forced to retreat. They cannot stay. The decision is made. Leave the reactor compartment sealed. Evacuate the stern. Preminin remains inside. After repeated attempts over several minutes, with oxygen running low and Preminin no longer responding to signals, the crew moves aft. He dies in the reactor compartment. The cause is heat exhaustion, gas exposure, or oxygen depletion. The record does not say which came first. K-219 surfaces on battery power. The rest of the crew is transferred to the Soviet merchant vessel Anatoly Vasilyev. Preminin's body is not recovered. It remains sealed inside the reactor compartment as the boat drifts on the surface for 3 days. The reactor he shut down stays cold. The Atlantic remains uncontaminated. His last action succeeded. He did not. K-219 surfaces safely. Reactor shut down. Soviet freighter Krasnovardisk attaches a tow line for the 4,300-mile journey to Gadzievo Naval Base. The plan is to bring the boat home, recover Preminin's body, and salvage the remaining missiles. The crisis lasts 3 days before the tow finally fails. On 6 October 1986, K-219 sinks to the Hatteras Abyssal Plain. Depth is approximately 6,000 meters, between 18 and 20,000 feet. Soviet recovery submersibles at the time were limited to much shallower depths, far above the wreck site. The boat, the warheads, and Preminin are beyond retrieval. But the story doesn't end when the submarine hits bottom. 4 crew dead, 3 in the explosion, Preminin in the reactor compartment. and 16 R-27U missiles carrying approximately 34 nuclear warheads, now resting at a depth no one can reach. In 1988, a Soviet survey vessel returns to the site. What they find raises more questions than answers. The hull is broken in two. Several silo hatches are forced open. Missiles are ejected or missing. Were they recovered by another party? Or did they simply tumble into the abyss? No one knows. What we do know: Russian investigators reported trace plutonium on floating debris. The warheads, those that remain, are still down there. 2 VM-4 reactors, all irrecoverable at that depth. Woods Hole researchers have since conducted extensive monitoring of the site. The long-term contamination risk? Unquantified. Monitoring continues. Captain Britanov faces a firing squad's worth of charges: negligence, sabotage, treason. The evidence? A snapped tow line and a captain who said no to the Americans. They lock him up, awaiting court-martial. But here's what haunts him more than any cell. Sergei Preminin, dead in a reactor compartment, while bureaucrats argue over paperwork. May 1987. Gorbachev's Politburo reforms sweep through Moscow. The charges against Britanov collapse. No evidence of sabotage exists. The tow line failure? Still unexplained. No answers, just silence. Britanov is quietly reassigned. A captain without a boat. A commander who saved his crew but lost everything else. He eventually immigrates, carrying one question no court ever answered. Why did that tow line break? The official Soviet line? Mechanical accident. Failed seal. Unfortunate chemistry. No prosecutions. No design bureau penalized. The incident is classified. Buried. Western intelligence learns the full story only after the Cold War ends, when it no longer matters to anyone except the men who were there. Seaman Sergei Preminin is posthumously awarded the Order of the Red Star in 1987. In 1997, 11 years after his death, he receives the Hero of the Russian Federation Medal. Monuments are erected in Skornyakovo and Krasavino. The inscriptions read, "Save the world from nuclear catastrophe." His family receives the medals. His body is never recovered. The reactor compartment remains sealed at the bottom of the Atlantic. He is 20 years old when he dies. The shutdown he completed by hand kept the reactor cold through the sinking and prevented radioactive contamination of one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Sergei Preminin remained inside the reactor compartment as the ship sank. The hatch he couldn't open from the inside. The hatch that needed someone on the other side. The Soviet Navy doesn't announce policy changes. They bury them in technical orders. Increased inspection of Yankee-class missile tube seals. A quiet shift from liquid fuel ballistic missiles to solid fuel designs. No more hypergolic propellants waiting to corrode through metal. And buried in the manual reactor shutdown procedures, dual-side hatch access. A sailor must be able to exit without external assistance. On newer submarines, reactor compartment hatches are redesigned. Internal release mechanisms. Every engineer who installs one knows why it's there. Every sailor who sees it knows whose death made it necessary. The Yankee-class fleet is retired by the early 1990s. K-219 and her crew never benefit from these changes. But the submarines that come after, they carry Preminin's ghost in every hatch. That opens from both sides. K-219 rests on the Hatteras abyssal plain, hull broken in two, reactors cold, 16 missiles scattered or missing. The site has been the subject of radiological investigation by institutions including Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and Russian research institutes, though the extent of ongoing monitoring remains unclear. Trace plutonium has been detected on debris that floated to the surface in the years after the sinking. The warhead casings were not designed for long-term immersion at depth. Corrosion is inevitable. How much plutonium has leached into the water column is unknown. The site is in international waters. No nation has claimed responsibility for monitoring or containment. The depth makes inspection difficult and recovery impossible. The warheads remain where they fell. Western and Soviet sources agree. No collision occurred. USS Augusta was in the area, tracking K-219 passively. U.S. Navy records confirm no contact. Captain Britanov and U.S. Navy officers jointly published statements after the Cold War, denying any collision. The explosion was caused by a failed hatch seal, seawater intrusion, and hypergolic propellant reaction. The tow line break remains unexplained, but sabotage theories have found no supporting evidence. K-219 was brought down by deferred maintenance, an aging hull, and the inherent danger of storing volatile chemicals at sea under pressure. The disaster was mechanical, not geopolitical. The hatch that trapped Sergei Preminin was a design artifact, not a design flaw in the eyes of Soviet engineers. External locking dogs simplified construction and saved weight. Internal release was considered unnecessary because reactor work was never supposed to be done alone. Procedure called for a two-man team and a third sailor outside, but the explosion changed the plan. Corrosive gas forced the crew aft before Preminin could finish. He stayed to complete the shutdown alone. The procedure assumed a stable boat and time to execute steps in order. K-219 gave him neither. The hatch became a coffin because the design assumed conditions that no longer existed. K-219 is remembered not for the missiles it carried or the depth at which it sank, but for the choice one sailor made when the systems failed. Sergei Preminin knew the hatch design. He knew the gas was spreading. He knew the crew could not wait. He went back alone because the reactor would not stop itself, and no remote system could substitute for hands on a crank. He saved the boat, the crew, and the ocean from contamination. He did not save himself. In the end, engineering is not about systems that work when everything goes right. It is about people who act when everything goes wrong. Preminin acted. The reactor stayed cold. His body remains at the bottom of the Atlantic, sealed in the compartment he refused to leave unfinished.